reach out to somebody just to say something nice, in the same way as if you saw somebody in a room wearing a really nice dress, you say, God, I love your dress. Where'd you get that from? You don't always have to be wanting to get something out of somebody. You can just reach out to them and say, God, congratulations, you've done really well. Love what you're doing. And it's like, that's not, to me, dirty or weird, or it's not laden with an agenda. It's actually just going, oh, do you know what, I'm going to congratulate somebody. And I think ultimately that will come back around.
Hello, what a treat you have today. So I've interviewed Dr. Harriet Treacy, who is a doctor and co-founder of Beyond BMI, which combines doctor-prescribed medication with nutritional therapy and one-to-one personalized support. So basically weight loss, obesity. And I'm grateful to be able to speak to Harriet because she's part of the Medic Footprints community. And I last spoke to her about 6 years ago when she wasn't really sure what she was doing in her career, in the sense that she really knew that she wanted to combine health tech and entrepreneurship, but didn't know how. So fast forward to today, she's managed to raise quite a bit of money for an idea that she's had to tackle obesity. So we talk about her journey and some of the challenges she faced, especially being a doctor, going through that funding process, but also some of the insights that she's had in actually being a co-founder of a company and really finding the right people to help take a idea to reality, and also what part failure had in that. So it really is a fantastic interview. And we also go back into really the importance of being self-aware as an individual before being a doctor on that journey. Really hope that you enjoy that, and do let us know how it could help inspire your own career journey. Let's face it, burnout amongst doctors is sky high, and we're actively seeking other ways to make the most of our transferable skills beyond the usual career pathways. Welcome to Disrupting Doctors' Careers. I'm your host, Dr. Abena Bubbers-Jones, and I'm on a mission to connect 1 million doctors across the world with the best in diverse career opportunities. Hello, Harriet. Welcome to Disrupting Doctors' Careers. It is such an honor to have you on with us. So for those of you that do not know, Harriet, part of the Medic Footprints community, has recently landed a seed funding round for her startup, Beyond BMI, where she tackles obesity. I think it's an amazing milestone that she's achieved. And as a doctor, she's been on her own really exciting journey to get to this point. And this conversation is really to outline what it took for her to overcome, which I know is several hurdles and obstacles that has really kind of contributed towards her achieving her greater vision of doing something really meaningful and tackling obesity using tech. So welcome. It's a pleasure to have you. How are you today?
Thanks so much. I am delighted to be here. And, just even thinking about what you're saying there, like, how it all actually started with, some early conversations with people like yourself, going to Medic Footprint events and just starting to scope out what was going on. So yeah, come a long way since then, but God, it was an interesting start.
Awesome. Well, let's start from the point in time when you made that decision to combine health tech and entrepreneurship, and that was probably about 5-6 years ago. So what was it that motivated you to kind of go down that path of mixing things up from traditional clinical medicine?
Yeah, so I suppose I've been a doctor 10 years now, qualified in 2013 from the university. And it was kind of in my first year as a doctor that, you're going from the theoretical to the reality, aren't you? And you're starting to notice things like the way you thought medicine should be and the way it actually is. And I think, it was in that first year when I actually got involved with the quality improvement project, and I had noticed that a lot of doctors weren't reporting. So, for example, anything from the trivial, like, there's not enough vacuum on the ward, right the way through to, the DFAB, the defib pads on the resus trolley aren't there. So I kind of came up with this pretty simple solution, which was an anonymized telephone reporting line. And we saw an increase in the number of doctors who were documenting these incidences rise to about 500% in the space of about a 2-week period. And I was delighted with myself, thought it was brilliant, and all of a sudden, I found out from the Quality Improvement Hub that they were actually closing down the project. And I went to speak to somebody in that hub and said, look, what's going on? We're seeing an increase in the number of reports coming in. And essentially it came down to resources. It came down to the fact that they didn't have enough resources, clinical resources, to actually keep an eye on all the reports that were coming in. And ultimately, I suppose, once you know something, you have to act upon it. So it was a bit of a demoralizing first experience, thinking here I am trying to improve something, and actually success equals a problem in the healthcare. So that kind of started making me think a little bit about the system that I was working in, and why was it that the system was operating in this manner? And if I was working in a business, would they have taken the same approach, or would I have actually been somewhat rewarded for what I'd done and told it was great that I was making improvements to the business? And I suppose that was one of those things, those little nuggets that stay in your mind as you progress. And ultimately, what I ended up doing was doing what everybody else did, which is go to Australia for a couple of years. And while I was there, although I was enjoying working and I was enjoying the kind of better work-life balance, quality of life, all of that, I still had that niggling feeling that I wanted to understand the system of healthcare a bit better. I wanted to understand the incentives underlying why was it that there was not a monetary incentive for actually keeping people well? Why wasn't there a monetary incentive for improving the way things are done? And that led me to start looking at different models of healthcare. So I found out about this model of healthcare called value-based healthcare, and it was operating in the United States at the time. I know we're all kind of pretty familiar with it now, but when I first found out about that back in 2016, 2017, it was kind of a new concept to me. And I contacted a CEO of a company out in the States.
I was going to say, for those people that are listening, pretend we don't know what value-based healthcare is, because not everyone does. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So value-based care is essentially aligning the financial incentives among all the different stakeholders to ensure that you are incentivized to keep people well. So how that might look is you might have a primary care center, they partner with an insurance company, and essentially they agree set milestones or set targets for keeping people well. So for example, a certain HbA1c or blood pressure or whatever it is. Now it's obviously going to be stratified based on different people. So if you've got somebody who's got multiple comorbidities, their target will be different from maybe a young, fit, healthy 20-year-old. But the whole premise is that you can put a number on what wellness looks like. And essentially, if you can stay within those parameters or keep your client or patients within that parameters, then you receive a financial gain from that. And I think what's really great about that is it just aligns the financial incentives. It means that your primary care provider is actually paid to keep you well, and your health insurance company is winning because they're ensuring a more healthy population. And then again, what that allows you to do is it allows you to be a lot more flexible with resources. So if you feel like you need a behavioral psychologist in your primary care practice, you get one in. If you feel like you need a health coach, you get one in. It's not this transactional fee for service type approach where you're paying just to see a doctor, regardless of the outcome that you get as a patient. So this was just fascinating to me, still kind of is. And I decided to contact the CEO over there, and he was really great. And he just said, look, come over and see my practices. So I handed in my notice and I went over to the States for about 6 weeks, and I traveled.
Was this when you were in Australia?
This one I was in Australia.
You went to Australia to the US. Okay.
Yeah. So I went over to the US, just like self-funded, and traveled up to Ohio, down to Dartmouth and Boston, where the main primary care centers had been started, and spent the day with the CEO, watched as he hired new members of staff, watched as he conducted meetings. Like, I got to see everything. It was
again, I'm gonna jump in again here. I mean, I think that's fascinating that you had the you proactively reached out to the CEO of this organization. How did you manage to get him to say yes to you coming over?
You know what, Abenya? I think people say yes when they're open-minded and when somebody has approached them proactively. I think like even today, like if I reach out to someone on LinkedIn, I would say my success rate of somebody replying is about 90%. And I think that's because, you know, if you contact the right person, they're open to it. They're looking to learn as much as you are. And, you know, obviously you have to phrase things correctly. It's not this kind of cold outreach of, hi, would love to chat. It's like actually genuinely connecting with somebody and genuinely, you know, commenting on something that you think they're doing that's amazing. And then people will get back to you.
I think that's a really important point that you've made there, and something that we do emphasize in everything that we do, podcasts, conversations I have in the one-to-ones, because, you know, a lot of doctors are scared of networking being a little bit of a dirty word. No one likes networking, but what I try to emphasize is networking is about building relationships to uncover opportunities in the future. It does not have to be transactional. But everyone if you're using LinkedIn or you're new to LinkedIn, it's important to remember that people are there to network. That's why people go on LinkedIn. And as you also quite rightly put forward, it is a bit of an art form in the way that you approach people. And it's really important that you are very specific as to why you're reaching out and what benefit that a conversation with this person could be for them as well as for you, right? You've got to be able to see it from both sides. So yeah, it is an art form. And
also just to add to what you're saying there, it's like it's about having that long-term view as well. Like,
yes,
you know,
longer term.
Yeah, like I mean, you can reach out to somebody just to say something nice, you know, in the same way as if you saw somebody in a room wearing a really nice dress, you say, God, I love your dress. Where'd you get that from? You don't always have to be wanting to get something out of somebody. You can just reach out to them and say, God, congratulations, you've done really well. Love what you're doing. And it's like this, that's not to me dirty or weird, or, you know, it's not laden with, you know, an agenda. It's actually just going, oh, do you know what? I'm going to congratulate somebody. And I think ultimately that will come back around. You know, it'll come back around. You never know when you're going to meet that person again. You never know where your paths will cross. It's just a good way to live your life, regardless of whether you're doing it online or offline, you know.
100%. It's what we do with our friends, right? And if you think about one of your oldest friends, I can't remember the first conversation I had with them, but I totally wasn't on an agenda. Like it was just like, hey, how you doing? And like, you know, the relationship flourished from there. So it doesn't have to be as transactional. Like most of these things are organic. But also purposeful as well, with a kind of, you know, intention behind it, but as you said, a longer term view. So so tell us more about that experience in the US and how that led to your startup.
So I suppose that was 2017, and when I came back from that experience, I was just pumped and I was really excited, and I thought, God, I'm gonna
the US does that. I have to say, I've been pumped quite a few times, having gone to the US, LA in particular, and like the really kind of blue sky's the limit thinking, which is incredible that I haven't actually had in the UK as at that level. But
absolutely. And I suppose I came back from that, and I decided at that point I wanted to move home to Ireland. I hadn't lived here for 10 years. And when I came back, I joined a local enterprise office because I wanted to learn more about how I could tease out this idea that I was going to try and bring over from the States. And I kind of smile to myself now because it's so naive. Like, you know, I had this idea of, I want to set up primary care clinics. I'm not a GP, no experience there, but it was that naivety that led me then to go to an enterprise office and run through a 6-week course where you essentially had to map out your business plan, you know, using the, you know, business canvas and the lean method, you know, lean startup canvas and all those kind of fancy things. And it was great because it knocked that idea out of me. And I was delighted, like at least I hadn't sunk too long into it. But I think what it really highlighted to me was my skills gap. It made me realize that, yes, I was a doctor and yes, I was passionate, but that wasn't enough. I needed to fill my skills gap. So I started looking at different options. I looked at doing a master's in
Can I just ask and just clarify and outline what were your skills gap at that time? Because I'm sure that a lot of doctors can identify with that.
So I suppose I wanted to start a business and I was trying to figure out what were the skills I would need to start a business. So I thought about a master's in public health. Now, the reason I thought about that was because I was interested in how healthcare works on a systems level. So I thought if I understood that better, maybe that would help me. But ultimately, I realized, actually, no, that's a bit too academic. I might come out of it understanding how the economy, health economics works in the US versus the UK, but it wasn't going to help me start a business per se. And then I looked at an MBA and thought, God, that'd be great. MBA, you learn all about business and how to run a business. But ultimately, what it wouldn't help you do is set one up. How do you know you got a good idea? How do you know that people are going to buy what you want? Like, all those questions don't get answered in an MBA. An MBA is great for like an operational person who wants to run a business when it's off the ground, but I wasn't in that position. So the third option then was this kind of off the side idea, which was essentially a master's in design innovation. And it was all about designing products and services, ethnographic research, which is basically qualitative research, human-centered design thinking. Probably heard of some of these things bandied around in innovation centers, let's say. And that just seemed like the right fit because it was a bit more raw, a bit more, get in at the ground and try and figure out if you got a good idea. And so that's what I did. And I signed up to that master's. And over the course of that master's, I did lots of different projects. And just coming back to your idea of being purposeful, like I made sure that when I was doing projects, I made sure they were always based around healthcare. So I did one on an insurance company. I did one on aged care. I ended up doing one on type 2 diabetes. So although I was exploring, I was also trying to hone it and keep it on healthcare. So off the back of that, then was that
self-funded, the masters that you did? Because obviously there are a lot of doctors. One of the things that I say, and as you probably know, is like the risk of like, well, we were all qualification junkies. So how do you make the right decision to go and do extra qualifications? When do you know that's right for you? And I think you've illustrated this as a quite good example where you've recognized as a skills gap. There's something very specific you feel like you want to learn, having actually done the work like ahead of time, and you found something that's very specifically meets that need, and the investment in it will actually help you reach a certain goal, which is
so I think that's a great question, because I think that was one thing I was actually really conscious of, was the fact that as doctors, we think if we add another, BMBS or another couple of letters after our name, that makes us more employable or that makes us more intelligent. And I think once you get into the business world, that's not the case. So what I did was chose to go down the route of getting a different skill set altogether. But I don't necessarily think that's the right thing to do. Like, I mean, there's so many other routes I could have taken. I could have decided, you know what, I'm gonna try and get into management consultancy. And actually, I kind of, you're giving me flashbacks here, because I remember actually contacting, I think it was KPMG or the Big Four, and I sat down with the management consultant, the head of management consultancy for the healthcare sector, and I remember him telling me, "Oh no, you have to go back and do a master's in management," or I can't even remember what it was, and then maybe I'll get a job. And I was just thinking, like, oh, do I really want to have to go back and do that? But yeah, I suppose, there is no right or wrong route to take. I think just a case of deciding what's right for you in the moment. And for me, this master's was the right thing for me, because it was giving me a specific skill set I was looking to get. I also was aware that I was going to meet a whole other section of people I'd never met, so that I was going to learn from them as well, which I thought was a good opportunity. I wasn't going into like a healthcare based master's. And also I think, look, I'm going to bring something else into the equation here, which is age. I think age had a lot to do with my decision. Like, I was 28 when I was making that decision. If I was 38, would I make that? I don't know. If I had kids and a mortgage, would I decide to do that? Maybe not. So I was aware of the fact of my age and how that would change my decision making as I got older. Do you even want to start a business when you're 45 and you're still paying off? I don't know, but I wasn't willing to take that risk. I wanted to do it when I felt like I didn't have many overheads.
Sure. And I think a lot of doctors are concerned about the financial risk, or the risk of even just changing careers, right? There's a financial risk attached to that. And a lot of us actually, why medicine is such a top choice for many people is because it's seen as a relatively secure career pathway, financially secure. That is, like, you'll always get a job, you're very employable, which is true. But as you know, at this point in time, there's a big conflict about the value of doctors in particular, and how much we're paid, which is a lot less than it used to be in real terms. But that is for another discussion. But yeah, no, I mean, it's a question that a lot of doctors face at various points in their career, medical student to retirees. And I've seen doctors start businesses at a whole range of different points in time. It also depends on, you know, what role are you going to have in your business? So obviously, if you start a business later on in your career, you don't necessarily have to be the one that's doing the doing, right? And especially if you've actually run a business before, there are different kind of roles you can take as a co-founder. You don't need to be in the business doing the running around. You can literally be, I am the visionary, I am going to raise money to hire people to do it for me, right? So there's, as you said, there's lots of different ways. There's so many different ways to do it.
I think that's it. And I think like giving yourself the space for experimentation, like, you know, you're not, this is not the treadmill, it's medicine. It's not, you know, I remember being in, you know, being like a fourth and fifth year medical student, and literally people had the next 10 years of their life mapped out. And I thought that was normal. I thought it was normal that actually you would know, when I am 27, I'll be finished F2. When I'm 29, I'll be finished my ST3. When I'm like, because that actually was normal for the environment that I was in. But step out of that, and it's like people are going left, right, forwards, backwards, sidestepping, macro environment changes, their job becomes really great and important. Like, who would have thought that e-commerce would have taken off the way it has? Like, I know people who started off in like standard marketing roles. They're now like head of e-commerce of large corporate companies. They never had that on their agenda. They never, because it wasn't there. So it's like,
didn't exist.
The predictability of medicine can be really hard to prize yourself away from, because when it's into other realms, it's not as predictable. And, you know, but that's not a bad thing. You kind of have to just embrace that and go, do you know, if I'm adding value, then something will come of it. I don't know exactly what will, but I'm going to just lean into that uncertainty a little bit. So, I mean,
I think I was going to say, very well said about the predictability of medicine. It's very difficult to prize yourself as a doctor away from that, because that is what we're used to. And, you know, I was talking to another doctor about how kind of the personality is how impatient we are when it comes to getting results. Like, you do something, you expect a result pretty much instantly, but that's generally not how it works. And actually, if you look back at, say, our training, particularly if you've been a doctor who's like hospital medicine and you've been training for like 7-8 years to get from, you know, foundation to expert, in inverted, not even expert when you're a consultant, you're kind of starting off being an expert, right? You know, it's actually a long time and incremental steps. But you look back and go, wow, I actually gained a lot of knowledge in that time. And a lot of it is the practical doing knowledge rather than the theoretical knowledge, which is a part of it, but not the main bulk of it, right? Definitely. So, So I'd love to find out a little bit more about the process of funding. So getting your idea funded. So firstly, can you tell us why you got your idea funded? Like, why was that important to you to get it funded?
So I kind of,
why did you need money?
So I kind of have to start just I suppose go back to the part about where I had just finished that master's, because that was the first step of funding. So I came off the back of that master's with an idea, with a co-founder who I'd met on that master's, and we brought our idea to Enterprise Ireland, which is, I don't know what the equivalent is in the UK, but it's
Innovate UK.
Might be, but
government. Is it tax money? Innovate UK.
It's a state-run body, and they actually, they're responsible for funding everything from small to large companies, and their whole value proposition is improving the exports of Ireland. So if you've got an exportable idea, which is essentially a scalable idea, then they'll get behind you. So I brought this idea to Enterprise Ireland, and there's lots of different funds you can get, but I found out about this fund called Commercialization Fund, and it was essentially a fund that's given to PhD students who have an idea they've worked on during their PhD, and they then want to commercialize that. So they want to take that project out of the university and turn it into a business. Now, I wasn't a PhD student, and, you know, I didn't have a deep tech idea, but I brought the idea to Enterprise Ireland anyway, and lots and lots of back and forth, but ultimately I ended up getting the funding, and that was 497,000 worth of funding for my first idea, which was called Blood Brothers, and it was essentially a direct consumer blood testing business for men who wanted to better understand their risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And it was going to kind of widen out from there to become more like a men's health employee benefits platform. So got that funding, ended up in one of the universities in Ireland, UCD, because you had to get the funding through that network. It had to be partnered with the university. And then COVID hit. And I think COVID was great if you had an established business, if you were a scale up, or in growth mode. But I mean, when you first were just getting off the ground, it was very, very challenging, because trying to hire people, trying to understand, you're still trying to build your network. You need a lot of support. And we were all just, nobody knew what was going on. So that definitely had a big impact on how that idea went. But just to fast forward, that idea ultimately, end of last year, so about a year ago, end of 2021, I had been working away on that idea. We had built some technology around it. We were going out to large employers and, trying to get traction in the form of a trial. And this thing started happening where, if anyone out there who's ever felt or known what traction feels like, and traction is this word that we use in startup land, where it's like, are people biting, do people want to buy what you have? And what happened was, I went to these large employers, and it started off as, oh, will you do a paid trial? Yeah, we'll do a paid trial. Not really hearing back from them. Will you do an unpaid trial? Oh, yeah, we'll do an unpaid trial. Not really hearing back from them. And then kind of going like, shit, maybe they don't want what we have. And having to kind of come to that realization that what we built, what we'd spent a year and a half on, nobody wanted. And I think that what's really important to learn about that is, and I still fall into the trap sometimes, is don't build something before you know if people want it or not. We thought that maybe people wanted this, but actually when it came to it, they didn't. And we'd spent a lot of time building something. So that was I
think that's a really important lesson learned. And I mean, having been through the process, obviously you did this master's, you managed to convince Enterprise Ireland and actually a lot of other people that this was worth building. So so obviously that you must have done some level of market research to ensure that you had a really good product fit with the market you were targeting. So where is it in that you feel like you went wrong? Because obviously you wouldn't have got that far had you not done that research ahead of time.
And actually off the back of the masters, we had done a lot of ethnographic research. So we'd spent probably 4 to 6 months going around to all the different possible stakeholders, trying to understand whether there was an unmet need. I'd spent time with pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, men's health clubs, I think called Men's Shed. I think you guys have it too. And also one of the state obesity services in Ireland. And it was when I spent time in the obesity services that I had noticed that 80% of people who turn up there are women. And yet, if you look at the demographics of who's living with obesity, it's actually slightly higher in men than it is in women. So you're kind of going, why are there no men in an obesity clinic when actually it's affecting men more so than it is even affecting women? And that was kind of the insight that I took away, and my co-founder took away, to say maybe there's an unmet need here for men's health. Now, without a shadow of a doubt, there is an unmet need for men's health, and I'm sure somebody else is going to have a great idea around that and be able to build it out. I see all these kind of sperm analysis testing companies setting up, and lots of interesting stuff in the men's health space. But what had happened to us is, I think we had taken the wrong insight. So when we then did look back over everything, when we had to make that really difficult decision as to whether we can try and continue pushing on with Blood Brothers or whether we pivot to another idea, I just went back and I looked back through all the insights we gathered, all the interviews we'd done, and asked myself, what was the real insight? And I think what had happened is I'd missed the opportunity. That was essentially that there's a huge epidemic happening right now with obesity, that there's a real difficulty in accessing services, that there's a huge amount of stigma, shame, bias around obesity, and that is actually perturbing people from seeking help. And that it's a hugely painful problem. And pain is a really important word when it comes to startups. People have to feel pain to be willing to do something about it. Like, think about You know, I actually worked in A&E. That's kind of like my background as a doctor. It's like 90% of people that turn up to A&E are there because they're in pain. You know,
yeah.
like why is it there's so many people out there have pre-diabetes? You know, why is that so rampant and nobody's going and doing anything about it? Because they don't feel a physical pain from it. Whereas you'll have somebody in the A&E with back pain, shoulder pain, abdominal pain. It's like that's, and I'm sorry to keep banging on about that, but it's like, if you're going to look at solving a problem, make sure there's enough pain around it that people want to do something about it. And when you look at obesity, there's enough pain there. People are suffering mentally. They've got depression and anxiety. They're suffering physically. They've got knee pain, back pain. They're suffering functionally. They're struggling to walks. They're struggling to keep up on family events. And they're struggling monetarily. You know, financially expensive to buy bigger clothes, second plane seats, all these things. And so looking back, I was like, here's the opportunity. And then you also look at the macro environment and you go, actually, there's a lot happening in the space now as well. There's new treatments coming out. There's a new wave of inclusion, diversity, and equality that's coming to the front and center, which is going to mean that people are going to be more proactive about fighting for people's rights in this area. So it felt like we'd gone a really long-winded way around to getting to what was ultimately what we should have started with, which was Beyond BMI.
Sure. So you pivoted from Blood Brothers to Beyond BMI, and you managed to raise again with that.
So we had about 50,000 left, not very much. That was to pay salaries, it was to pay everything, and we just thankfully managed to turn it around. We only had about 6 months to do that before all the funding ran out, and the funding did run out around July, August of last year. So we went about 5 or 6 months without salary after that point. But what happened then as well was I was very lucky to meet, she was now my current chairman, and he had a background in, you know, he's run multiple businesses, has had multiple successes, and having his commercial lens and commercial input was really, really helpful, you know, if not completely key to bring this business on. And what we did then was we went out and we looked for funding, and thankfully maybe Beyond BMI and the market and the opportunity just resonated. And luckily we managed to close a seed round at the end of last year, which was for 525,000. So wow. Here we go again, Abenya.
That's amazing. And I think obviously you've just glossed over the details when it comes to actually raising money. Not that it is an easy feat at all. I mean, we've got a few minutes left. I'd love to find out a little bit more about your experience as a doctor raising money for your idea and your business. Like, what insights can you share with us on that process, considering your background, and also how you use being a doctor to your benefit in those conversations?
Well, I think being a doctor is ultimately just an automatic trust thing. You know, people speak and they go, right, they're a doctor, and, you know, I'm going to trust them. I think you also then have to demonstrate how you being a doctor is actually going to add value to the business. So it's like, you know, I'm not an obesity expert. Now I've increasingly understand the disease of obesity. I'm going to be practicing on our platform because I've become so au fait with it. But I got obesity experts involved. So I've got professors of obesity involved in this business. Some of them own shareholdings in it. So surrounding yourself with the right expertise is key. I suppose when it comes to the funding piece, again, like, you're not an expert in funding, and fundraising is, what I have come to learn, is a business function. So people look at funding as, I need to get through the funding round so I can then get on with my business. No, funding is integral and part. It's like the oxygen you breathe. You know, if you don't have oxygen, you can't survive. If you don't have money, you can't survive. So you need to make it a business function. It needs to become something that it's actually even integrated in our business goals now. It's like to be able to raise sustainable capital, because without that, we can't grow this business. So what I would say to that is just make sure that you have people who you can lean on, who can really help you with that process. And I have that with my chairman.
Where did you find your chairman?
So it's all very like, again, network. It was like my mum's best friend and his wife are best friends, and
Right.
this kind of thing. You can't discount network. It just is what it is. And it's like, do you ever see like really famous people setting up companies? You go, how have they done that? And you go, do you know what? Just look who they're surrounded by. They've got someone who's going to give them money. They've got someone who's going to, plug them PR wise. Like, there's no accident about the equity and equality of setting up a business. Like, yeah, it's just a one of those things in life, I think, that we have to be honest about. It's like, and my network I still know I've got a lot of work to do with it. I wish I had, new people in higher places more, and all that kind of stuff, because it just makes a difference. It changes the game.
It helps you get things done faster, having the right expertise and knowledge and insights at your fingertips. And so maybe networking is also a business function, right? As part of the, your own, as a founder, that is your job, right? It's growing, it's being the visionary, but also it is about who you know to help grow that business. And as a founder, you can have various functions within that business. Well, what is your function actually as a co-founder? What is your core function?
I mean, at this stage in the business, it feels like everything. I'm involved in the sales process, both actually delivering the sales and building out the sales pipeline. I am involved with partnerships. So we've got a B2C and a B2B element about what we do. The building out the different partnerships. I'm involved from a PR perspective, making sure that we put out in it, this image of clinically led, medically led, because that is what we are, and that needs to come across to everybody, whether it's somebody buying the service or whether it's an investor who wants to invest. I'll be involved with the fundraising. I'm involved with making sure people get paid. It's HR function. I try to outsource some of those things where I can, but you still end up involved in it. You still have to double check stuff and all that kind of thing. So there's so many things you're involved with. And I think where possible, you need to try and outsource non-revenue generating tasks. And by that, I mean HR, accounts, anything that is not directly related to bringing money into the business. You need to try and find somebody else you can lean on a little bit. It doesn't have to be a full-time member of staff. You can hire people, but trying to prize yourself off of that, really challenging, but you kind of have to do it. I'm still by no means good at it. I'm making so many mistakes still, but
that's part of it though, isn't it? It's part of it, making mistakes, learning fast, moving on quickly. And just before we close off, and something we were talking about off podcast, really frustratingly, we were talking about the value of knowing who you are as part of the process of changing careers, diversifying your career, moving into the wider industry healthcare setting. Can you comment again a bit about what that means to you, what that involved for you?
Yeah, I suppose you and I were having a bit of an offline chat there about like your identity as a doctor and how influential that can be in your decision making. Like when you see yourself, or you believe that you are seen as valuable because you are a doctor, because you have that expertise, it can be so hard to separate that sense of who you are from what you do. And if those two things are together, if they're both, if who you are and what you do, you feel are the same thing, you'll never be able to move away from medicine, because you'll feel as if you're abandoning your identity. But if you're able to kind of separate them and say, well, who I am is this curious person who wants to learn, who's always loved learning, who wants to try new things. And by the way, what I do is I'm a doctor. And I love what I do, and I love helping people. And just because I'm not a doctor doesn't mean I don't love helping people. It just means that it's just what I do. Then it's easier to move forward. It's easier then to kind of say, well, do you know what? I don't have to be a doctor to help people. I don't have to be curious. And also, like, you don't ever really lose the doctor piece. Like, I mean, you've learned a huge amount by being a doctor. I still am a doctor. I still practice as a doctor. That might not stay that way forever, but for now it is the case. And I think that, but I also see myself now as a CEO. I now also see myself as a as a founder, I also see myself as a complete learner in so many things as well. So I just don't, and I think what can really help you to separate identity from what you do is also making sure you have other interests. Like if all this fails in the morning, touch wood, it doesn't. If it does, it's like, I still have relationships, I still have family, I still have all my learnings that I can take into another area. And again, Ben, we were talking about this offline, but like I've listened to some of the podcasts that you've done with other people, and listening to them, I remember going for walks. I live near the sea, like going for walks and just thinking and asking myself, like, who am I and what can I bring to the world if I'm not doing this? And even listening to those podcasts helped me to see how other doctors have framed it, and really, really helpful, because you realize that you think you're unique and you're not. Like there's a lot of other people who are going through the same thing.
Yes, I think that's a really great point to end on, because you think you're unique in what you feel like you have as a doctor. You are, but you haven't been able to articulate it that well, because we are all unique individuals, right? We all bring something different to the table, but because of the way that we've been trained to be interchangeable. We've been trained to be dispensable. So until you do the work on yourself in the way that you've just described, you won't be able to differentiate yourself from anyone else pretty much who's in the same space. And that's one of the keys to actually moving ahead, is to basically step out and be your own category of one, and what you have to offer to the world and who you are, right? Because we are all in our own category.
And that's where experts come in. Like lean on experts. Like I went to a career guidance guy before, and it was so helpful for him to look at me in a way that I'd never looked at myself. He was able to have project management skills, and you have management skills, and you have leadership skills, and he was listing off all these skill sets that you could literally put on a CV, and I hadn't seen myself through that lens before. So I think it's really important that you don't try and figure this out on your own. Like I'm actually a big fan of that whole concept. Even in business, it's like, don't try and figure stuff out on your own when there's lots of other people out there who've solved it 10 times over. Just try and find them. And if you can speak to a career guidance person who can start to put a shape on how you can put yourself out in the world and how you can describe yourself in the world, just it'll be the best money you probably ever spent, instead of being at home like going over and over and over in your head again, trying to craft up a
absolutely. And for anyone who's plugged into the Medic Footprints, well, we have Medic Footprints approved coaches that you can reach out to on our website. Most of them are doctors. They know exactly what you're going to do. They've worked with so many doctors like you. So don't hesitate to use that as a really important resource and investment in yourself. But anyway, thank you so much, Harriet, for joining us, for really sharing your insights, which is it's deep, right? It's remarkable. You're so reflective, and it's so refreshing to actually be part of this conversation in that sense, because again, like I think a lot of the career change journey, we see what it is on the surface and what you see in the magazines and the PR and all that jazz, but there's so much beneath that surface that you clearly have gone through, you've worked on in order to achieve what you're doing, which is really making a huge, impactful, transformative change in people's lives, particularly in the obesity market. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you. And also for sharing that story to doctors who will hopefully use this as inspiration to move forward in their careers, for, to do whatever they think is going to be impactful, right? So thank you.
No worries. Thank you so much.
If anyone wants to get in contact with you, what's the best way of doing that? I always end with that question.
Reach out to me on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, doing a cold call approach.
Yeah, why not? Why not?
Awesome. Well, thank you, and take care.
Yeah, thanks so much, Benya. Take care.